Sami, let me start with you.
Sure.
The whys and wherefores. How did the mashup series start? What was the big idea driving it?
Right. So to go back 40 years, Flushing Town Hall has always had a mission of promoting global arts. So even when we started in 1979, we were noticing the demographic changes in Flushing. So this mission of presenting immigrant art forms, art from all over the world, we've been doing for a long time. And we started to notice about 7 or 8 years ago that if we would do a specific program from one country, like China, the Korean community wouldn't come. If we did a program from Ecuador, the Peruvians wouldn't come. So you start to notice when you're doing a very global mission and you're like, oh, we're going to try to program for all the communities around us in Queens, which is extraordinarily diverse, but still the audiences will be divided into little segments. So we decided about 7 or 8 years ago to really start to pursue different kinds of cross-cultural programming as a way to get audiences to come and appreciate each other's kinds of music or culture. We did a number of different things, including a joint calligraphy exhibit with Chinese calligraphy and Korean calligraphy. But the Global Mashup series has been the most significant effort that we've made in this cross-cultural way. And what I would say about it is there's kind of two approaches we've taken to cross-cultural work. One of them has been cross-cultural work that is related. So we've done programs, for example, of music from South America where we've brought even Colombian music from one part of Colombia and from another part of Colombia. We've done Pan-Asian things where we bring, like we had a wedding dress exhibit where we have Korean and Indian and Japanese, right? The point of Global Mashups is the opposite. Rather than doing things that are similar, we're trying to find combinations that are totally unthought of, totally unusual, trying to bring people that would have no reason to have an interaction or for cultural reasons. There's no cultural history of X, Y, or Z. So the first year saw Korea meets Greece and Brazil meets India, and we just tried to come up with combinations that were really different.
So the idea was to bring in two distinct audiences and get them mixing in
That's
addition
exactly
to
right.
the bands.
Exactly.
Did you get a third audience? Did you get, did you start to see?
So what I would say is that the Global Mashups program has really helped overall to get our audiences to be more interested in each other's cultures, and so that we have noticed audience growth where each audience is more diverse within itself. So it has worked. There's more work to do, but it's definitely, we've seen positive effects from that.
So you're seeing like world music fans.
Yeah,
Western
world music fans will come to that. What's great about the shows is because we open up the floor for dancing, and we offer dance lessons before the show in each culture. So when Martin does Colombia meets the Philippines, we're going to have Colombian dance lesson and Philippine dance lesson for a half hour before the show. And then people will learn to dance to each kind of music, and then the bands will jam together at the end. So we leave a lot of space for dancing, so it's become very popular for people to come. It's a party scene, but a party scene with completely different kinds of music.
Right. So Martin, what, if anything, do you know about the music of the Philippines that you've been paired with?
Well, I know a little bit about it. I like it. I'm familiar with the gongs. With actually, there is a rhythm that we play in Colombia, and they play it in Mexico too. Is this party rhythm called fandango, and in Philippines, because they were part of the Spanish Empire at some point, they also have something that it's derived of the fandango. They call it pandango, and they have these string instruments. I'm not sure the band we were mashing up with, they play that pandango style, but I'm looking forward to definitely talk about it and hopefully collaborate with the Colombian fandango and the Filipino pandango. So that, and I'm also, acquainted with the dance form, very gentle, very nice, and we'll see how it goes. I'm excited.
So what is it that excites you about it? Is it the prospect of having a whole different audience or being part of a larger thing?
It's just the concept of combining these two very different sounds, right? My band features tuba, clarinet, accordion, hand percussion, guitar, vocals. It's a high energy. And this other ensemble, they are more into the traditional, ritualistic, lower dynamic type of approach.
Very stately kind of music.
Right.
Courtly, even.
So I'm wondering, how is it going to be that we're going to bring these two opposite sounds together?
Well, now, Frank, you have some experience having done exactly that. First of all, tell us what your show was.
Last year on Flushing Town Hall's Global Mashups, I brought a small klezmer, a traditional klezmer brass band, and we met with Spanglish Fly. And it's interesting, of course, that even the musics, these are called mashups, but even the component parts are already mashups. And in the case of Spanglish Fly, it's like, just as this is a New York, a Queens phenomenon, Boogaloo is a New York mashup of rhythm and blues and so-called salsa. Let's not get into what salsa is a mashup of. I mean, it's an endless mashup of the mashup. And of course, when we came together, as opposed to, as Martin said, he found a connection between his music and the Philippine. It was much more obvious because in New York, the mixture of Yiddish music and culture and Spanish, salsa, mambo has been more or less a phenomenon for well over 70, 80 years with bands, Latin bands, Xavier Cugat playing in the Catskills. So we had, and of course I've been playing in salsa bands as well, so we had just almost too much to draw on. It almost became a little too easy to do, and everyone had fun. And it's also, I don't know if this is true of each of all the bands, but I look at this wonderful program that you'll talk about that they have for this year's season. But we're New York musicians. So even in your so-called traditional Hungarian band, there's probably an African-American jazz bass player, or, we all come to it. We don't put these boundaries about it. And most often, not exclusively, people in one band have already played with people in the other group because it's New York. So I love that what you've done, or what Flushing Town Hall has done, is created a real celebration of what is so wonderful, the best of New York in these cultural things.
So, Sami, do you try and keep it local because of everybody lives here? Do you have to go outside to get some of the bands?
Well, let me first start by acknowledging our fantastic programmers for the series. So the series was really conceived by Ellen Kodadek, our executive and artistic director, and Clyde Bullard, our longtime jazz producer, who's been producing programs at Flushing Town Hall for like 25 years. We do, to answer your question, we do keep the ensembles mostly local because obviously we're paying two bands for one night. There's a couple other reasons. Obviously, there is so much local talent, and we're trying to connect with the bands that have a following right here in New York. So that's definitely important. But for certain occasions, we have looked outside of New York. And I can think of two in particular. Last year, we had a group called the Lemon Bucket Orchestra, who is a Ukrainian group from Toronto. And they came down. They were fantastic.
And 18 people, I think?
Yeah, I don't think all of them came, but that was a very big, high-energy show. And as part of this series, in our first Global Mashup on February 29th, this time, we're bringing back a really wonderful group called Betsaida Machado, Betsaida is a Venezuelan singer. We had her do a solo show, I believe, 2 or 3 years ago, maybe 2017. Touring this fantastic Afro-Venezuelan music. She is a powerhouse vocalist, and the ensemble is like a village ensemble from this part of Venezuela. So we had the opportunity. She's coming back touring, and like, oh, let's do Venezuela with her. So she's doing that Venezuela meets Klezmer on February 29th.
And Frank, I mean, it sounds like from what you were saying before that mashup kind of, the whole Latin and klezmer thing, as you say, has happened.
Yes, but really no, because there's been a big shift in what one might call Latinx music in New York over the past, Martine will jump in and help me, I'm going to say the last 12, 15 years, whereas, back, if you go back to the 50s and the 60s and 70s, it was Cuban and Puerto Rican. And then Dominican became a big, and when you thought about all the New York Latin music, it was Cuban, Puerto Rican, Dominican. But then over the last 12, 15 years, really Peruvian, Colombian, Mexican,
Argentina.
Well, I didn't want to go to Argentina and Brazil because that's another world entirely. But yes, of course. But so really, I mean, it's hard to really compare the Afro-Venezuelan music of Betsaida Machado exactly with what Spanglish Fly is doing. The rhythms are really different, the melodic things. I mean, they have some connections, the linguistic, but that's been part of the growth of New York, and Martine is a big part of that new wave of what it means to be a Latin musician in New York.
Right, I agree. For me, I would say the last 20 years.
Okay.
Since, a new generation came over, and suddenly you didn't have just one very important performer from Colombia or like a jazz guy, and then you had several little folk bands playing the street festivals in Spanish Harlem or in South Bronx or in Brooklyn or Queens. And then this new, it's also the time, but at early 2000s is when world music is at its peak. So we are all trying to play traditional Colombian music or bringing these very eclectic sounding bands together, That's where I met you, playing salsa here, Brazilian there, jazz over here, Klezmer over there. And it's been a great last 2 decades, I would say, for Latin American and world music in New York City.
So your band, the Cumbia River Band, how traditional a Colombian group are you?
It's not traditional, I would say. It's based on the tradition, but we take our chances. Our music is a little different. The format, the orchestration. I am featuring tuba, accordion. Many times they think I'm a Klezmer musician, right? So that sounds just like the band I saw at this wedding last week, and I'm like, well, because I'm merging different Colombian sounds, the brass band sounds, the accordion, not the buttons accordion, but the keys accordion, which is a little bit of the underdog in Colombian cumbia. We like buttons accordion for a cumbia. So, but because in New York, you don't find many of those. Those are diatonic. You can't really change keys easily. So having a keys accordion, it gives you many possibilities. Then I picked the clarinet a few years ago, and I'm working on my repertoire, so I feature the clarinet.
Well, you're playing clarinet?
I'm playing clarinet.
Excellent.
And then I have my drummers, the traditional Colombian drummer, and a drum set player, drum set is my main instrument, and I have a lot of work on that, the Colombian drum set. And so I'm putting this new sound together, and I play some traditional, not traditional, I would say standards from the golden age of cumbia in the 20th century. I'm talking about the orchestras that featured euphonium, clarinet, accordion, not the traditional style that I used to do with La Cumbia Manaya. Well, I still do it, but
Right. When was that golden age?
1940s, because of the influence of the big bands. It was huge. Venezuelans picked on that too. Both of them were playing Colombian music.
So, do you prepare for a concert like this mashup, differently than you would for a normal gig?
Well, in this case, we are going to treat it differently because we want to connect with the other band prior to the show and just try to talk about it. And the day of the show at sound check, we'll have a rehearsal. But I mean, we'll see how it goes. I'm actually writing a new fandango that I want to premiere that day,
Oh, nice.
with the excuse of merging the fandango from Philippines and the Colombian fandango. We'll see how it goes.
Oh,
So-
wow.
I just wanted to say something based on what Martin said, which is that part of the joy for the audience.
Hold on a second. Who's popping? Okay, just watch the P's.
Okay.
Just if you're,
Okay.
yeah.
Part of the joy of these global mashups, because it's put together often on the day of the show, the audience is totally engaged with how much is really the communication on stage, because we're to a certain extent faking it, and the audience loves that. I mean, you have a freedom because everyone knows it's not a rehearsed, finished product. And I remember that the audience actually really loves that excitement to see the musicians from these different cultures and traditions interact right in front of them. It's true improvisation.
If I could pick up on what Frank was just saying, in our first year of doing the series, none of the bands prepared. And one of the things that happened, because I remember kind of being the senior staff member covering the event, and the bands would show up on the day of the show, and they're saying, "Wait, you want us to play together? What?" And I would have to have a conversation with them like, "It's in your contract. We spoke to you about this already." And they'd be like, "Huh? That's not going to work. What are you talking about?" I'm like, "You have to do it." So they would be like reluctantly going on stage together after each of them had their own solo set. And what would happen is that they would start to listen to each other. And that, what Frank was talking about, that magic of communication between musicians, they start to listen, they start to find a little bit of a beat that works for them, a little bit of a sound. They start to jam together, and this feeling would wash over the whole audience of like wonder, like, oh my God, this is working, this is happening. And that, I think, even when bands prepare a little bit, like what Martin is saying, there's still that element of magic of like, this is a trial, this is a test, we're going to see what happens. And the audience comes for that third set because they want to know what is going to happen when, Korea meets Greece. We had a Korean percussion ensemble and a Greek wedding band in our first year, and it was wild.
So Frank, what was your third set like that night?
Our third set was pretty ecstatic, and I actually would love to focus on the dance part of it, because we've been talking all about the music and the culture, but as you mentioned, the dance is a big part of this. It is, so this breaks all sorts of boundaries. It's not really a formal concert. You've been taught certain dance steps, and during the Klezmer set, if you think about the difference in the musics, in the dances, Klezmer is a circle dance, a group dance. Salsa Boogaloo is a couples dance. So right away, a big distinction. And we had two wonderful dance leaders, one from each tradition, and they kind of exploited that difference. So you had like a big circle, which had a lot of, talking about your audience, Dr. Shumays, you had a lot of the older Jewish people and even older non-Jewish people dancing like the slow circle around the outside, with people sort of, the younger couples, shaking it in the middle. And it was, so to be on stage and watching this, because my entire musical career, I've been playing for dancing, all sorts of dancing, and dancers inspire us. They tell us what tempo to play at, they tell us what energy level they need, and it was just beautiful to see both things, and I think that was actually a big part of the joy. It really became a party. I don't know if I answered your question.
But that's a great answer.
Yeah.
But now I guess my follow-up was that kind of dichotomy of the couples doing their thing in the midst of this slowly moving circle. Was there an analog to that in the music?
I wish I could be intelligent and tell you, yes, absolutely, we found the ratio of, no, but really, actually, it was the opposite. It was the opposite. I think that the dancers found in the music how to do both. I think we were more concentrating on what you said about getting that rhythm together, finding the meeting point, and they kind of found it. The funny part was that our dance instructor she knows all the Yiddish dances, but actually her passion is tango. So instead of being the one leading the big circle, she was up in the middle with her partner, and so so she abandoned ship and followed her bliss at that point. But but no, I think they found it. They found it. But I think it's implicit or inherent in the music, and that's why your curation of getting groups that, whether they're more traditional or more experimental, every one of these groups contains people who are perfectly fluent in their traditions, whether they chose to represent that in their groups. And therefore, we all know, each of us knows the rhythm that our music and our dancers need. So we're not going to neglect that. We're not going to all of a sudden invent something new, although that can happen also, I suppose,
We'll bring you back enough times.
Yeah.
So it's music, it's dance. What about food?
We have been trying to bring food into it. It's sometimes we've managed to make that happen, sometimes not. I think we're going to try a few times this season. I mean, all of us at Flushing Town Hall love food. If you work in Queens, you kind of have to love food because there's so much around. And our audiences definitely love food, and we have all these different cultures. So we have tried once or twice. It is sometimes not the easiest space to cater in, but when we can, we will. Sometimes we do something simple like empanadas or something like finger foods that'll be like that. I can't speak right now which concerts are going to have food, but
okay.
Some may.
And what about drink?
Drink, yes, we definitely serve alcohol. Sometimes we've tried to bring like beer from one country or another when that's possible. I think if we really were able to expand the series even more, we might try to focus on that even more. But yeah, for sure.
Are you thinking of expanding the series?
Well, I think there's a couple things. We've been doing it now every year for the last few years. We're now starting to build some awareness. Last year was the first year that we sold out shows. So our first year of doing it, our theater seats about, it seats 300 at maximum capacity, but because we leave room for a dance floor, we're fitting about 270. So the first mashups in the first season in 2013, we had audiences of 60, 70, 80. People didn't know what to make of it. They're like, what is this? Why am I, right? But last year, for the first time, almost every single one of our shows sold out. And as a result, there's this awareness building, and thank you very much for helping us spread the word by talking about it with us. We've only been doing it in the spring. I think if we're able to keep it going and add more throughout the year and have more awareness across the city of what we're doing, then other things become possible. But we're definitely continuing. Where
do the ideas come from? Is it your little crew, or if Frank and Martine say, "Hey, I'd love to play with this band from Afghanistan," does that happen?
All of the above. I mean, one thing that I'll say about curation at Flushing Town Hall is, so we do have an artistic director, Ellen, who is also our executive director. Ellen is herself a very broad-minded person who's very interested in cultures from all over the world, but she has done a very great thing, which is to really have multiple curators on staff. So our education director, Gabrielle Hamilton, who Martine works with as a teaching artist, by the way. Martine does programs for us in the schools. Mm-hmm. Gabrielle has a lot of expertise in Latin America and Native American programs. Sean Choi, our marketing director, brings Korean ensembles and has his own expertise there. Clyde Bullard, like I mentioned, jazz producer. We have a director of Chinese initiatives who does research in that. And then because we work with so many artists, we do definitely take these suggestions. So Frank is trying to pitch something for me right now, you were just saying, and I'll pass that on to Ellen, and especially for this series, because we're really trying to do something different every year with the series. We definitely need, for this series in particular, to find, we haven't done something. Someone just emailed me this morning. I know this really great band that does brass music from Benin. You have to bring them next year.
Wow.
So
here in New York?
Yes, they just moved to Brooklyn, and I don't even remember the name. But a friend of mine.
Is it the Gongbei Brass Band?
No.
Well, they were living in Belgium for a while.
No, it's a different group.
Right. That's who I was.
So look out for Benin, brass music from Benin in 2021 or something like that.
All right. Guys, this has been great. I have way more than I could possibly use, but that's the way these
Thank
things
you.
work. Thank you guys for coming in. And
Thank you for
pleasure.
having us.